We're very honored to have Edward Novis with us today. He is a professor at Holy Trinity Seminary in Northern New York. Teaches currently English and philosophy as well as New Testament. Has a very interesting educational background. He went to Dartmouth and majored in English, but minored in women's studies.
Women gender studies.
Women and gender studies, not just women's studies, but women gender studies.
Oh, the only straight white man.
And this led him to get a master's, both in philosophy and in theology, which then led to his current position, and he's studying now to get a PhD at the University of Albany in Byzantine history. So we've got two parts of the talk about kind of identity in terms of how the Orthodox Church understands this, and in terms of how the world understands this, kind of where we are today. And so we're going to start with that second part.
I guess first say prayer. All right, so first question. How does the contemporary world understand gender? What is gender? Gender. Why would there be multiple genders? Why do they want that? Why do they want infinite genders? What did they get out of it?
Whatever you want.
What?
Whatever you want.
Yeah, you get a little freedom, right? And you get the sense of empowerment to determine your own identity, right? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, gender is a grammatical category, whereas sex is a biological fact.
So that's very important. They understand gender in a binary between sex and gender, right? So, yeah.
Gender is pretty much what you want to be, so technically I could identify as an attack helicopter.
Yes, you can. If you're really attracted to attack helicopters, nothing can stop you from doing that.
Two things. Gender is optional, and gender is correlation with sexuality.
So what is that? How does that relate to sex? What is sex? And not sex versus sex and gender, as Father said there.
It's a classification.
What?
Sex is a classification.
Well, sex is supposed to be your embodied identity, right? It's what your body is, and then gender is how you express your body, according to contemporary gender theory. Right, so just because you are female in your body doesn't mean you have to express yourself as a female. Right, you can express yourself as a male, you can express yourself as a female if you have a male body, you can express yourself as vapor sexual. That's all. I'm just so fluid, I'm a vapor. I have no embodied reality anymore. Okay, so what else? What else in the contemporary world think about these things? What were you saying?
Me?
Yes? You said something.
I said gender fluid.
Gender fluid. Right, so the idea of this division, the sex gender division, is to create fluidity because they believe fluidity is freedom. Right? I don't want to be boxed in, right? That's the opposite of fluid, is to be boxed in to my biological sex, right? My body. That's too much of a constraint. I want my freedom, my subjectivity, my personality to shine through. So the sex gender division is very important. So that's good. All right, and what about in reality? What do you think male and female are in reality? Yeah.
They're both sex and genders because I learned this not too long ago, but documents, like legal documents, used to interchange sex and gender. So pretty much it's like, I guess the exact same thing.
Well, originally, right, your sex determined your gender, right? Whatever your body was, that was going to place you in a certain mode of being, and that would place you in a certain role in society. So there was no difference. This difference happens around the 1960s, right, in post-modernity. Yeah.
Could one say that sex is objective and gender is subjective?
For these guys, right, that would be the case. And even, there is a reality to this division, right? So just because a woman has a female body, you look at different cultures, and they have different expressions of what it means to be female, right? The ancient Greek culture, you go to Africa, right? The women have to wear their the necks are stretched up, right? So that was considered beauty. That's a gender expression. So in general, yeah, the subject-object distinction is very important, which we put over here too. But what about in reality? What does it mean to be a male? What does it mean to be a female?
XY chromosomes or double X chromosomes? I guess.
Yes, literally. Women are XX, right? Male XY. Transgender people, do they ever become the actual other gender that they see? No, because they can't change their actual chromosomes, right? So ultimately, it all becomes imagination. Classic. But what about expression? What is a man supposed to do? Yeah.
Provide and protect.
Provide and protect. Why?
Because that is what his, that is what his role is from the beginning.
Why can't a woman provide and protect?
She can in a different way.
What? In a different way.
She can in a different way.
And that's what makes it a little confusing, because you try to put words onto these sides, and then you ask, why can't a woman do it too? Or why can't a man do it too? Right, yeah. What?
Men are built stronger, even like you want it with them that.
Well, so that's why they're better at protecting. Yes, and providing, a woman nurtures, right, so she has to provide for her child in a different way. But protection, generally, a man is stronger, and he can do that. What about a woman? What does a woman do?
Nurture.
Nurture.
Teach.
And this is also, so this is what we think men and women, but what does Christ say about himself, which is actually kind of interesting in this context. Yeah.
That he was like the mother hen.
He calls himself a mother hen, right? So it's very interesting. Yeah.
No, I didn't have
Yeah.
that.
Somebody else? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man?
We have these roles from long times ago. You have all of these roles in different cultures because women get pregnant and then they have 9 months in which they are not as strong because they're carrying another human inside of them. And near the end of the months when they're very pregnant, they can't chop wood or do stuff like that because they have a baby inside of them. Meaning that you have to have someone else to do this stuff for you. And you don't see this as much as in birds because birds lay eggs. And after the eggs are done, they just protect them. And I have a ton of ducks, and it's interesting to see the behavior inside of ducks. Of ducks is that male ducks do their own thing, and female ducks' whole goal in life, because they don't stay together forever, it's males just do whatever they want. And so the role of a female duck is really just to watch for eggs and feed herself. And then when ducklings hatch, they're already able to eat stuff, so it's really her job is to take them around and make sure they don't get eaten. Meanwhile, with human relationships, we tend to have two people staying together because, I guess, it was Adam and Eve. So you also end up with these other animals that stay together forever. And it takes 18 years for general adults, but it takes like 15 years for a child to become a suitable adult adapted to their climate and ready to do their own. I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, we're going to talk about gay ducks. Apparently. Contemporary postmodern world, sex and gender are divided, right? And why are they divided? In order to free the person to express their gender in any way, right? That's their desire. Their desire is freedom. Whether or not that's true freedom, that's another question. We'll answer that question later. But what they want is freedom, right? And then what we saw here, when you think about what it means to be a man and woman in your context, right, you understand that there is an objective, solid reality to male and female bodies, which is real, and they want to get rid of that to this point. But then when you get to actual expressions of gender, things become a little more questionable, and we're going to talk about that too. So good. All right. Now we're going to talk about today how these things got so confused, because this wasn't a problem in the classical world, right? So I'm going to give you a little history here, which is 2,300 years. We're going to do that in about 10 minutes. And then we're going to get to some details about the medieval Catholic world and the medieval, or the modern Western world, that sets up the problems that are trying to be solved by postmodernity. Why are they so obsessed with freedom? Right? That's a big question. And we're obsessed with freedom too, right? Christ gives us freedom. So if Christ gives us freedom, they want freedom, right? What's the problem? Right? Why do we conceptualize freedom differently than they do? Right? Because they want the same things. We want the same things ultimately. And it's the desire. The desire is natural, right? But the object of their desire is incorrect. Right? So we both share the same desire, but we have different objects to satisfy our desire. So the question is, whose object is better, ours or theirs? Right? But we know the answer. We're going to talk about that later, though. So these gender issues weren't a problem in the classical world. Right? The classical world, you think of the pagan world, pre-Christian world. And this is classical world throughout the world. Right? Classical Chinese societies, classical Greek societies, classical Greek societies, imperial Roman societies. Nobody had gender troubles in these times, right? Men did what they needed to do, women did what they needed to do in their roles, but also the roles were a little more open, right? We think about the ancient Greek women, and they worked in home economics, right? They worked, they balanced the books of their husbands, right? So they had activities. They weren't just at home passive little pretty songbirds that made babies. But nevertheless, their primary role was in the private life, right? So there was strict gender roles, but those roles also allowed for a little bit of freedom within them. Right, so there wasn't a problem. Men and women just tended towards their positions. And this is because gender is an aspect of the human person, but the human person is a rational animal. This is the philosophical definition of a human person. We're rational animals. We're animals that have reason. Right? This is followed by the church as well. We're both rational animals. We have a mind and a body. Christ came and incarnated to redeem our animal nature as well as our intellectual nature. Right? Not just merely a hologram. Right? He came and redeemed our entire animal constitution without dividing it. So we're rational animals. But gender is not an aspect of our rational nature. It's an aspect of our animal nature. All right, so gender, how do you learn how to be a man? How do you learn how to be a woman? Who teaches you? How do you learn it? Yeah.
From your parents.
From, and do they just give you a treatise? Or do they say, men do X, Y, and
They show
Z?
you how.
Women do X, Y, what?
They show you how.
They show you how, right? So, yes.
So you also are to start with, so you have the instincts to be who you are.
Right, so we're rational animals. Reason, the intellect, right? We use words to express the intellect. But animals don't have these words, right? So our gendered aspect is what we share with the animals. And the animals don't use words, they use instinct, and they follow along, they imitate, right? They imitate. So in the classical world, there was still, you would say, they call it naive, that they were naive in their instinctual repetition of gender roles, right? They didn't critically examine the gender roles. They just simply went along with the flow, right? In the classical world. And everything, according to gender, was decent. However, women were still under the yoke of the man, right? It wasn't until Christianity that there's actually a liberation of the female experience, right? There's no man or woman in Christ, right? So generally speaking, no gender trouble, though women were still under submission to the men. We're going to talk about this next time, what it means to be under submission, because women are still under submission in the epistles, but it's a different kind of submission. So classical world, no problems. However, there was a gender asymmetry. With Christianity, the genders become symmetrical, right? There's no man or woman in Christ. And Orthodoxy continues this early Christian intuition, and we're going to talk about this next time. But starting in the Western medieval into the postmodern, this is where they start, instead of natural imitation and instinctual repetition of gender roles, we start getting in the medieval world a kind of philosophical, theological abstraction that then is imposed upon both men and women. And you see this starting early in the Western world with people like Tertullian and Augustine, and eventually with Saint Thomas Aquinas. So who are these names? Have you ever heard those names before? Yeah.
No, I'm saying I just not heard.
What?
I'm saying I've heard of the names of a couple of them.
Who are they? Who are these people? Yeah.
Monks, usually.
I don't know very much about Tertullian, but Augustine was the bishop of Hippo during relatively early on, and he wrote a lot of philosophical works.
And it's even debatable whether or not he's a saint in the church. Some people defend him as Saint Augustine. He is Saint Augustine, and the Fifth Ecumenical Council does say that he is worth reading. But there are many problems in Augustine, and he becomes the one early church father that determined the ethos of the West. Right? He developed original sin, which we have a different view of. Yep.
And the other thing is that Thomas Aquinas is a major figure in Catholic philosophy and theology, and he created many Catholic doctrines, and he wrote things like the Immaculate Conception.
He didn't write, actually, he was against the Immaculate Conception. His Bonaventure was against the Immaculate Conception. So we will talk about that. Okay, so starting with Augustine, let's start with Tertullian. Tertullian said that women were the devil's gateway. He said about women. This was the essential nature of women. Women were the devil's gateway. Jerome, another Western father, said women were the root of all evil. Which is wonderful. Yeah, so you get, your problem with that. Right. And biblically, what is the root of all evil? What does St. Paul say about it? What?
Satan.
No, well, so St. Paul has the statement, I think it's St. Paul. It says root of all evil. X is the root of all evil. Yeah.
Pride.
No. Yes. No.
Love of money.
Love of money. Love of money specifically, right? Not just the money. It's the love of money that's the root. But everything's the root of all. Pride is the root of evil. Satan is the root of evil. All these things are roots of evil. But specifically the statement, love of money is the root. So Jerome changes that, right? That's what the Catholics do. They take biblical sounding things and they kind of twist it a little bit to make it abstract and incorrect. But it sounds right. Women are the root of all evil. Maybe once I've it's actually the men's problem. If they think that the women are the root of all evil, that means that the men are perverted, right? That means their mind is incorrect. Augustine, very important in this history because he created this concept of original sin. For us, generally speaking, sin is in the will. It is an action of the will. So it's the objects that we choose to fulfill the natural desires that God gave us that is the sin. Our sin is in the will, generally speaking, for Orthodox. Original sin is in the body. Right? It's something that you can't remove for Augustine. It's an itch that you can never scratch. And that's why as things progress in the West, right, they start flagellating themselves because they're trying to remove the sin that's within their flesh, that's somehow transmitted corporally. So they have a problem with the body, they have a problem with women, And then eventually, by the time you get to Thomas Aquinas, he brings them both together, and he says that women cannot achieve rationality because their bodies are too soft. Right? Why? Why would that be a rational thing to say? According to the very rationalist Thomas Aquinas, why would that be a problem to have soft bodies? Yes.
Because back then it was like kind of survival of the fittest ideology where only the strong people would prosper in the nation and the weak ones would be sent in to be rulers.
Well, but to begin with, right, that's true. But specifically the softness, right? The softness means that their body kind of gives way, right? Kind of push in, right? A man's body is hard. And reason is hard-lined, like a male body, right? And so women, because women are not hard-lined, they're softer, they're more like emotions, right? Emotions change in the same way the female forms. So, for Thomas Aquinas, females could not achieve rationality, right? They were not rational creatures. And here for us, right, the definition of a human being is a rational animal, right? This is given to both male and female, which is why there's no male and female in Christ, because both of us are rational animals, and we have the ability to achieve rationality. This was denied women in the West, according to Thomas Aquinas. And so this division here becomes standard Western understanding. Right? It's the man versus the woman is like the mind versus the body, the intellect versus the emotions, and ultimately active versus passive. Right? The man can think, he has the rationality, and like the mind uses the body, so the man uses the woman. Right? That's why the man has to think for the woman. The woman can't think for herself. Geez, if you let a woman think, what's she gonna do? I don't know what she's gonna do. Probably play with birds or something. The man has the rational intellect, the eternal intellect, doesn't change. He knows thoughts that are forever true. But the woman, 1 minute she's happy, 1 minute she's sad. And what are you going to do? You have to, the intellect has to control it. So the man has to control the woman. And as a result, right, the emotions in the woman are not actively controlled by her. They have to be actively controlled by the man. The same way the mind is supposed to control the body. And so the woman's ultimately seen as passive. The best thing a woman can do is not act at all. Right? If she acts, then ultimately it's just going to be corporal, embodied, sensual disgustingness and emotions, which men don't want to deal with. So stop, do nothing, and let the man take care of everything. Right? That's ultimately what happened, and ultimately true. You see this, right? Especially 1950s America, the 1950s household. Right, you also get the Victorian cult of motherhood, where the wife is only good for singing like a songbird and making babies. As long as she doesn't speak, everything's okay. A woman is to be seen and not heard, just like a child. Only a mature man is the active principle, right? So you see that there's oppositional relationship in the West, right? And this actually did become very real for around between 500 AD, the medieval period, up to about the 1960s, right? This was the real gender dichotomy. Woman, shut up. Just make me a sandwich, that's all she's good for. Yes. And so it was a little revolutionary when women started to go to college, right? We talked about that and these problems of can a woman go to college? Well, in the classical world, women were philosophers. In the Orthodox world, the great sainted family of Saint Basil the Great and Saint Gregory of Nyssa, they had a great sister, Saint Macrina. You know about her? Who is she?
She is their older sister, and she's a monastic.
A great monastic, right? Which is, and we're going to see this with the Theotokos, the different visions of the Theotokos. She's also a great philosopher, right? She's the image of the philosopher Saint Macrina. Which again, that would be unthinkable in the medieval West. And in the modern world. And so in the West, what happens? A woman must be passive. If she's active, if she generates any kind of power in herself, what does she get labeled as? A witch. She's a witch. Yes, and it's true. It's actually true. You, in Russia, the majority of witches that were arrested for witchcraft, not burned actually, the East never burned witches for the most part. A few witches were burned, but this kind of witch craze is only in the West. In Russia, most witches, were they male or female? What?
Female.
No, male. Yes. Again, because of this gender construction that was imposed on women artificially. And actually, the real witches in the West were the priests who were doing necromancy. And when they learned the witchcraft from the Arab philosophers, they received philosophy from the Arabs, and part of that philosophy was occult philosophy, and they started to do necromancy in their black masses. And then when they got caught doing necromancy, then they blamed the women for being witches. It's real. What's necromancy? This is
Manipulation of the dead.
of the dead, yes, and they learned how to do that. And they were using the mass, the black mass, and the necromancy that they were doing, the saints, right? They were using the idea of venerating the saints, but they were turning it upside down and using it to manipulate the dead, right, in order to create spells to do whatever they needed to do. And they found multiple in the early late medieval period. They caught a lot of male witches doing necromancy. And then about 100 years, even less than 100 years later, about 50 years later, then the witch craze happens, right, in order to deflect the responsibility of the woman. In manipulating this already abstract theological, philosophical gender identity system. So the witches are women in their active potential. The Immaculate Conception is the perfection of the passive woman. Right, what is the Immaculate Conception? Somebody else, that's good. Yeah.
That was conceived with no original sin.
Without original sin. So again, connecting the dots, right? With Augustine, you have original sin being in the body, transmitted physically. So a very negative view of the body, which is a negative view of the animal, which then turns Catholicism into a kind of Gnosticism that denies the body. So not only is it denying the body, it's also denying the woman, because the connection of women, body, and emotions, right, on one side, and man on the other side. So denying the body, and specifically, all activity that comes out of the Theotokos, right? So she had to have a special grace that was irresistible for her to conceive Christ. She had no will, right? She became an empty, passive vessel through which God acted in the world. An empty, passive vessel. Immaculate Conception, right? That's why she's immaculate. She's empty, right? Clean. This again, also there's an idea of abstract cleanliness in the modern world, which we'll see too. So, women in the active potential in the West were witches. Again, these days, witchcraft is very popular, right? This is also something that's becoming that's on the rise. They said that 2018 was the year of the witch, right? Because people are looking for some kind of mysticism, right? And witchcraft, especially since it was subversive and underground in the West, is considered cool because they hate Western Christianity for good reason. So they're going to the opposite extreme and becoming witches as a way of demonstrating their active, authentic potentialities that were denied for 1,000 years. So witches are the active woman, Immaculate Conception is the passive woman, and therefore, gender confusion for the woman. Yep.
When you say witch, you mean like them talking to the demons to use like through magic?
Yeah, magic, magicians. Yeah, witches are the female version of the magician. Yep.
But wasn't there always through like history, like I forgot where I read it, but it said that throughout history and throughout like time that women have been like trying to become like male authority just for being like more in power. Like, isn't power like one of these main problems?
Well, that's the next question. What does it mean to be an active woman, right? And not merely this empty passive vessel, right? That's what the problem is in the postmodern world, is that the women have been artificially reduced into this passive emotional state, and they're trying to find some kind of active existence that gives them a sense of authentic life, right? They don't just want to be cast off into the world and told what to do by a stupid brute man that won't even talk to them, right? They want something. They want to feel alive, right? Who doesn't want to feel alive? But the question is how they go about that, right? So in the classical world, women were given a certain amount of activity, right? The women were helping with the home, even in economic and business transactions and things like this. Women could be, there are famous women philosophers, right? As we talked about, let's say Macrina in the Christian world, but even in the ancient world, there are female philosophers. And that's part of activity, right? Using the mind and grasping truth. That's the ultimate vision of human activity, because we're rational animals, and the key is to focus on actualizing our rational potential. So that's true activity, true life, and all these things, is to be a rational person, given to both men and women. But how the woman activates her potential is a question. And when you talk about witches especially, right, the idea of the witch woman, right, that makes a pact with Satan in their Sabbath, right, that goes into the woods at night and meets the goat-headed Satan, right, and bows down to him and writes their name in blood. That only exists in the West, right? That is a symbolic constellation that is only Western. Never existed before. The closest is imperial Western Roman ideas of the female sorceress. Right, that's the closest, but that constellation of purely women as witches is something like 90% of magicians burned at the stake were female witches, right, not men. In Russia, it's the opposite, right? When they go after the witches, when they go after the magicians, what they find men doing these magical rituals, not women, right? So that shows that there has to be something going on deeper than the reality and more of a symbolic construction that's being imposed artificially. But the question is, it's a good question that you're asking, how does a woman, and a man for that matter, right, demonstrate their activity? And that's what we're going to talk about next time. So a division in women, right, that the woman has to be passive, and if she's active, there's something suspect, right? Suspect at the very least. Witches at the very worst. Suspect at the very least. With men, it's equally as bad in the West, right? With the same divisions of active and passive, but reversed. The male is supposed to be active according to this system, and the active male is most visibly seen as the secular warrior of feudal society, right? The protector, right? When you think of male protector, right? This is the secular feudal warrior that has to go into battle, the crusader, right? That protects the holy Christian West.
So you were talking about how men are supposed to be reasonable, intellectual, women are supposed to be the emotional ones.
Right.
How so did that kind of switch in our modern day? We just spoken about toxic masculinity. Men being a ball of aggression, unreasonable, angry.
So that's this next stage here, right? So there's a division in masculinity. As there was a division, a rupture, they call it a rupture. What's rupture? You know that word? Rupture. What does it mean?
Break.
Yeah, well, you're shaking your head. Yeah, yes, ruptured, broken. So instead of a unified vision of having an aspect that is passive and an aspect that is active, and an aspect that is passive, right, it's ruptured down the middle. And there's an excess in one direction, right? And what happens, to your question, if you have an excess in one direction, the pendulum swings in the opposite direction and you get an excess in the other. Right? The excess of female passivity leads to the excess of female activity in the postmodern world. Right? They're trying to make up for lost time to a certain extent. And you get the opposite with the man. Right? The man with this active intellect, with Thomas Aquinas' division in the modern world, right? We're going to talk about this too, the scientist, the male scientist. You have the young male scientist versus the old female witch, right? Both of them are masters of medicine, right? The young male scientist, he's doing his chemistry, he's learning all the pharmaceuticals, right? And all these things. So he's trying to take away what was originally given to the woman, what was originally the female specialty, right? The old woman who knows the secrets of the herbs and the herbal medicine, right? That power that the woman had was taken away from her and given to the male scientist who was purely abstractly rational, right? His little not arbitrary, his sterile laboratory conditions, right? And we're going to talk about that. For instance, why are all hysteria cases women? Right? Why are 75% of those diagnosed with borderline personality disorder women? Right? What does that say about contemporary modern psychology? That women are always the ones, diagnosed with these psychological problems. And why are the women the ones who can't fit into our society? Right? If you look at how many people cut themselves, right? It's the women that are cutting themselves, right? It's the women that are committing suicide, mostly, in our contemporary world. Why is that? And we have to get to the modern world eventually, too. What time is it?
10:40.
So there's also a division in masculinity, right? The same kind of division that you see with feminine, you get the same thing in masculinity. You have the dumb,
You said about suicide rates for women being higher, but that's only in recent years because before it was male, but the only reason it's female spiked is because that nowadays in pop culture and stuff like that is, for some reason, ideal to be more suicidal because apparently it's cool or something like that.
well, that's the question. Why? Why is it so? Why are women doing that? Maybe you can answer that. You're the ones in this world where everybody's committing suicide and cutting themselves.
Because the more problems you have, the more different you are. It's the way, like, the more out of the role, the more you have against you.
And then you get the victim complex, right? And then people have to like you and be nice to you. The more a victim you are, the more they have to love you. And that's the big issue, right? Is actually trying to get people to love you, right? We have to talk about the modern world eventually and the impersonal system that's occurring here. But that's it. I mean, it's completely impersonal. Generally, parents don't interact with their children according to interpersonal means. What they do is try to get them into an impersonal public job. Right? The only thing the parent does in the contemporary world is set up the conditions for the child to get a job that makes money. Right? They don't actually care about the child or their emotional well-being and things like that. Parents, this is true. Right? So why are they so desperate for love? They're desperate for love because they don't have relationships. And so they have to go to those extremes. You're going to say something?
I was just asking about the time, like how do, in the Western world, how do figures like Queen Victoria or Catherine the Great or Elizabeth fit into the modern conception of gender? Like
well, Catherine the Great would be in orthodoxy. And when you see strong women figures throughout history, they're mostly within the Orthodox tradition. Right? We have great empresses in Byzantium and in Russia. Right? This didn't happen until very recently. Right? Elizabeth is a early modern queen to begin with. So in the medieval world, this didn't exist. right? But in the medieval Byzantine world, it did exist. And in fact, 2 out of the 7 councils were convened by female empresses, right? Empress Irene, and I think the other one.
Theodora.
What? Theodora.
Theodora.
Right. So the powerful women, right? Powerful female figures. How are they going to actualize themselves? Well, that's one way.
I have a comment, if I may.
Yeah.
We in the ancient church, and especially in the West, we know oftentimes who the mothers are of the saints, but not who the fathers
Oh,
are.
there you go. See, the women. Yeah, we preserved the.
And they were active, not passive.
There you go.
And in ancient Russia, Olga was considered one of the smartest people of her time. Just
And I think Empress, the Grand Duchess Elizabeth, right? She has a PhD in philosophy. Yeah.
Oh, Empress
should have flunked
Irene.
your course.
She was the first female ruler of the Eastern Empire in her own right.
In her own right.
And that was when Charlemagne said, well, the crown has collapsed because there isn't a man on the imperial throne. Therefore, I will take the imperial throne, and there's the beginning of the so-called Holy Roman Empire. In other words, the West did not accept the legitimacy of a female ruler.
There you go. So even, yeah, that's good. A good example of what's going on in the mind of the West, and why we have the gender problems to begin with. Why we have these gender problems, and why they're not applicable in our context to a traditional Orthodox society. But just last thing here, and then I'll answer questions. You have a division between the priest class and the warrior class in the terms of male imitation, right? What it means to be a man. And when you have the celibate and ultimately effeminate and affected mysticism of these late medieval priests as the image of masculinity, right, that creates, again, confusion in the married male sphere. Right, if your only image of a sanctified man is a celibate who has this strange mysticism, which we don't have to talk about, you're going to get a confused vision of what it means to be a man. So when you're looking for a vital, virile, non-celibate masculine image, right, they can't turn to the church to have a healthy vision of this. They have to go downward to the secular warrior man view, right? So that's, and we have it today, up to today, the idea of, you know, the warrior being the height of masculinity, right? You have to be aggressive, you have to take down the whole world for the sake of democracy, right? All American masculinity up to the postmodern world has been a warrior mentality. And that creates, again, the excesses in both directions. And what happens here with the celibate effeminate priest, very weirdly, is that they start to create a kind of homosexual vision of Christ. So the late medieval period, there are women mystics that become brides of Christ, a whole flurry of them, like Catherine of Siena, Teresa of Avila, and people like this, late medieval mystics, and they became brides of Christ and had very strange experiences that your little teenage years don't need to hear about. But what happens is that the male priests then try to take up that, and they become brides of Christ, and there's this strange late medieval homosexual mysticism among the priests. Right? So the passive, effeminate priest becomes almost a homosexual at this point, and then you have the excess of the heterosexual warrior male. And this sets up the dichotomy that's in the world today, right, where what is it, well, the world of the 1950s at the very least, what does it mean to be a man? You have to be aggressive, you have to be forward, you have to be, you have to like sports, you have to be brutish and mean, right? You can't be sensitive, you can't like art. If you like art and you're sensitive, what are you? You're a wuss, and therefore you're what? Homosexual. You're homosexual, you're gay. Right, so this setup here is also going in the back of their minds. Yep.
I understand how it's like women become more active and like it affects them that way, but how does it go the other way where men become more passive?
Because the only vision of masculinity prior to this quote-unquote gender revolution was an excess of activity, right? You always have to be running around, you always have to be fighting the battles, either in economics or politics, right? You have to be insensitive, right? You have to not have emotions, right? This is part of the early 1900s, right? Is that men could not have emotions; they had to kill their emotions. And if you cried, for instance, you're a wuss, right? You must be gay if you cried, or things like that, right? So it sets up this problem. So you have an excess of activity, an excess of this warrior identity that has to be squashed in the gender revolution. So you go in the opposite direction.
But I thought it was because of like parental so like if like you have overbearing like mother or like siblings which are female, then it creates like a negative view for the male and it makes them turn towards the same gender.
So well, that's also part of it. So we talked in the beginning, right? Gender is determined according to imitation, right? So especially with broken homes, right? You don't even have an image of a man anymore because you're raised by a woman, for instance, right? So that's already a problem. That's like a second aspect here because of the genders are confused. Therefore, the two genders that are supposed to be in harmony with each other, right? Not opposed. Here, there's an opposition. Right? They're supposed to be in harmony. Like the charism of a woman is supposed to balance the charism of a man. Right? That's in the natural vision. And then they're supposed to be in harmony as a family, but here they're at odds with each other, so that breaks up the family. And then what happens to the children, right? They no longer have a man, and if they do have a man, it's probably the stupid, drunk guy that doesn't want to talk to them and just watch TV, right? Like Homer Simpson, right? Becomes the image of the stupid man, right? That's what it is. And one of the most interesting statistics, I don't know if you've done it today, is they did a study on articulation, right, in men, right, the ability, the vocabulary levels, right, and their ability to converse. And they found that homosexuals, or people quote-unquote that identify as homosexuals, they're more articulate and have a higher vocabulary than heterosexual men, right? And therefore they're more intelligent than heterosexual. And they love that, right? That becomes their favorite factoid. Right? They are more intelligent than stupid brutish men. And why is this stupid brutish man? Because he's not supposed to think. Right? He's supposed to act. Right? And he's supposed to trample his competitors and bring as much money as possible into the home to provide according to material considerations for the family. So no time to think. Don't think, act. Right? That's the modern mentality. Don't ask questions, do.
How does this fit the dichotomy? If the man is supposed to be the intellect, the rational, the mind,
Right.
where did that go?
That's a good question. So that's through the medieval into the modern, and into the modern hierarchy pyramid of capitalism, right? So you have the one CEO organizing everybody else, and everybody below them doesn't have to think or shouldn't think, right? You should unquestionably, this is the warrior mentality, right? Unquestionably follow the leader and the general according to his desire, right? So only one person needs to have a mind, and that's the CEO. Everybody has to submit to the CEO and do exactly what he says. So that creates a whole realm of these stupid men. Yep.
I want to make the point, as a mom of 6 children, 5 of them are boys, and I think a lot of it too, it definitely ties into if you don't have a man in the house. I mean, as a mom, I don't know how many times I look at my sons and go, what are you doing? Like, why? I mean, like, why would you do that? Why does that seem fun or enjoyable? Like, I really does not compute, right? But because I do have my husband, and my husband is not, he would probably have fallen in the geek area of things. So he's not a super sporty guy or any of those things, but he's still a man. And I can look at him and watch the way he interacts with him, and that affects how I see them. And I don't look at them as brutish and mean and angry. I mean, my boys, the best, they love to show affection for each other by wrestling and beating each other up. And they're wonderful afterwards. I mean, but that is true. And so, but if you don't have the man in the house, or you don't have that understanding from a woman's perspective to see that that's actually okay. Like, yo, I would never dream of beating my friend up to show her how much I love her. But if you lose that, like, everything comes falling down. So, I mean, losing the family and losing the man in the family and being involved in the family is, I think, had a huge effect on how our boys are being raised and how our girls see men.
Well, and then why, right, when you have all these single parent females trying to raise boys, they can't understand them from the inside out. So what happens if they try to only deal with the external manifestations of their gender and not the internal cause of their activities? Right, so they don't know how to actually redirect that violent energy. You don't want the boys to beat each other up, but at least the man knows why the little boys are beating each other up. Right? They try to move the energies in the right direction.
And the thing is that to a certain extent they have to be allowed to do that, because that's part of how they figure out that's part of how they grow. Is that physical?
Yeah.
And yet, why is that the way they have to grow? And the reality is as you go through this timeline, psychologically, we cannot remember 4 generations ago, psychologically. We don't know 4 generations ago psychologically. So psychologically, we're so messed up in the West. Men should be thinking and feeling, contemplative and active,
Yes.
all of it together, but we have no idea what that actually looks like in the West, because we've been so dichotomized. Women should be thinking and feeling and active and contemplative all together, but we have no idea what that looks like in practice. And so the West, at this point, when it's postmodern, is 1,000 years of the fall, unmitigated by the lack of church.
And that's the crazy thing to think about, right? Is that it's 1,000 years of doubly fall, right? We're already fallen naturally.
Absolutely.
But this is a double fall because they're falling away from the church.
So we can't even discuss, in a sense, we can't even discuss how boys should be raised because we don't know how boys should be raised. And we can't even discuss how girls should be raised because we don't know, because psychologically we can't remember more than 3 to 4 generations before us. And that doesn't take us to the 1900s or the 1850s.
And now American librarians are being told to throw out any book that's more than 25 years old and hasn't been checked out twice in the past year. So we are losing books that show a normal family. And
But it's abnormal still.
Right.
But no,
Even that wasn't
it's
normal.
abnormal still.
And then you throw in the effect of the Vietnam War on the American seminaries, where for Western religions in America, if you went to seminary, you didn't go to Vietnam. And so all the religions in America skewed left, because it was the people who did not wish to go to Vietnam. And sometimes that was more important than their religious beliefs. And so it's taken the Western religion further away from the manly example of, say, the apostles. You know, and now we have the effeminate model of the person who's highly articulate and thinks that everybody should be a little bit closer to the feminine ideal than to the manly. Yeah.
So I think, as we said after the first talk, I can tell that we picked good talks because people want to discuss these issues. This is not the end. Actually, there's another part to this, a kind of, if we've had the way in which things are not right. Tomorrow we'll hear the way in which things really should be. And we'll have, again, more opportunities to discuss this later. So we thank Edward Novis for his first